Okay, so thank you to all of you that are joining this webinar live, as well as to those of you that may be watching a recorded version. Today, I'm going to be talking about compassion during COVID-19 and discussing ways in which we can be caring towards ourselves and others during this pandemic. So perhaps in this moment now, feel encouraged by your choice to watch this. And I hope by the end of this talk, you'll be able to view this choice as a compassionate step towards improving your well-being. So just to start with a little bit of saying about who I am. So my name is Sheetal and I'm a clinical psychologist and I work in a lovely little perinatal team in Hertfordshire where I've been working since 2017. And I'm also a mother to two boys, Dylan and Ruben, who are 5 and 3 years old. So my aims for today are to offer you an understanding of compassion drawn from a model of therapy called compassion-focused therapy. And this was originally developed by a clinical psychologist called Paul Gilbert. And this integrates therapy techniques from cognitive behavioral therapy, as well as drawing upon concepts from developmental, social, and evolutionary psychology, and is based on neuroscientific research. So I'm going to begin by talking a bit about the meaning of compassion and using ideas from CFT, and then to follow with a presentation on the theoretical underpinnings of this model. And then I'm going to talk about the benefits of compassion and offer hopefully some helpful strategies that you might be able to draw upon in order to increase your compassionate selves. And I'll finish by acknowledging some of the challenges that are often experienced by others when being compassionate, particularly when being compassionate to ourselves. So Paul Gilbert defines compassion as a deep awareness of suffering of oneself and of other living things. And this is coupled with the wish and effort to want to relieve it, to alleviate it. So here we can see that there are two parts to thinking about compassion from a compassion-focused therapy approach. The first is acknowledging that we or another is in pain. And most of the time, we typically find that we avoid or minimize or distract ourselves from painful emotions. That's the first part. And the second part of this definition is a commitment and desire to want to alleviate that distress and a motive to want to reduce that suffering. So here I think you can see that compassion is not just about being kind to yourself or perhaps letting yourself off the hook. Being kind is just one way of doing compassion. But it's actually more about having the courage and noticing and appreciating those difficult feelings. And then thinking about ways you might be able to reduce that suffering. Thinking about evolution can really help us appreciate and understand the universality of our minds and how they have developed to be as they are. And this can really connect us together when our emotional pain and critical thoughts actually often lead us to feel this deep disconnect from others. None of us chose to be born. We didn't choose the families we were born into. We didn't choose to be females. We didn't choose to grow up where we grew up. And we didn't choose what socioeconomic group we belonged to. Our bodies and our minds were made for us, not by us. And with that, we also then didn't choose to have the brains that we have, that have certain modes of operating and are triggered and react in certain ways. None of this is our fault. And yet we are here with those brains and bodies that we have, And our challenge, as I see it, is to consider how we can make the best of what evolution has given us, so that we can be our best selves in a world that we live in now. So how have our brains evolved? Well, neuroscience suggests we have three main emotion systems, and Paul Gilbert represents these as three circles. So the first is called the threat system, and this acts as our brain's alarm system, and it alerts us to signs of danger. So when we feel that rush of anxiety when we first hear about COVID-19, or that surge of anger that someone's perhaps cheating the social distancing rules, or a disgust feeling when we smell curdled milk or changing dirty nappy, that's our threat system working. And this system operates on a better safe than sorry principle. So if it detects threat correctly, just 1 out of the 10 times, then from its perspective, it's doing its job. Because if you think about our ancestors who were faced with a hungry lion, those that hesitated, even for just a second, were more likely to be eaten. And our threat system is also hypervigilant to noticing our position in relation to our social group. We as social species, and being cast out from a group would mean that we were in direct threat. And so we're highly attuned to noticing those signs of rejection from others. So this system is activated very quickly, often before our conscious awareness. And we experience very strong and powerful physiological sensations as a result. The threat system is associated with stress hormones such as adrenaline and cortisol. And a natural response for us when this system is activated is to flight or fight. The second system is called the drive system. And this is a pleasure-based system, and it produces a sense of reward and excitement when we do something fun, achieve a goal, gain mastery. So for example, if we get the kids to school successfully on time with all their books, or if we master a sleep routine, or perhaps when we meet friends for a dinner date, or maybe take up a new hobby like pregnancy yoga or something like that. The hormones associated in this system is dopamine, and this is our brain signal for reward. And the final system to think about is our soothing system. Now, this system is also pleasure-based, but associated with a feeling of slowing down, of contentment, and where we experience that sense of safety. And this system is particularly activated when we're around others that we trust and care for. It's also activated when we engage in activities that help to slow us down, like taking relaxing baths when the kids are asleep, or practicing mindfulness, or sitting on the couch and cuddling our baby while he or she sleeps. This system activates what's known as that feel-good hormone, oxytocin. It's the same hormone that's linked with mother and baby bonding. And when we're operating in this system, we're more likely to be better at problem solving and making wise decisions. So a bit more science, which I appreciate might feel quite heavy, but bear with me if you can. I'm going to think about our autonomic nervous system. And our threat system is connected to part of that system, which is called the sympathetic nervous system. And that's the bit of our nervous system that's in charge of fight or flight. And the sympathetic nervous system triggers that flight or fight response by releasing stress hormones, such as cortisol or adrenaline. And this then sets off a cascade of well-orchestrated physiological reactions that are really useful under a threat response. So things like our pupils dilating, our heart rate increasing, an inhibition of our digestive system. These are all purposefully activated to help us focus all the energy we have and respond effectively in the threat to fight or flight. Conversely, we have the parasympathetic nervous system, and that's the part of our nervous system that's responsible for slowing our bodies down and enabling us to rest and digest. So here, this system triggers hormones that help us regulate and stabilize. And here we can make more effective decisions and make more wise choices. It's where we're calmer and can think more clearly. So the point of showing you this is really just to emphasize again how connected our minds and bodies are and how they each influence one another. And that engaging in behaviours that perhaps we might have once considered as luxuries, particularly when we're looking after little people in our busy and pressured lives, like sleeping and other relaxation activities, they're actually more than just nice things to do, and they're hugely influential on our well-being. This current pandemic is a huge threat to our existence, and one that no one else in our lifetime has ever experienced. Of course, you all know this far too well. We are constantly bombarded with these messages from our smartphones that ping up news alerts, and the TV and radio presenting heartbreaking and scary stories. And of course, so much uncertainty still remains, meaning that the possibility of danger for us almost feels palpable. Couple this with being pregnant or having a small baby, and that brings a whole host of additional fears and stresses. Of course, there will be hormonal balances which contribute to that stress and sensitivity, but our threat system might also be activated by self-criticisms about our mothering abilities, maybe, how we compare to others. Are we bottle feeding or breastfeeding? Are we doing baby-led weaning or feeding through a spoon? Are we having a natural birth or an assisted birth? Can my baby sit up yet? And how does that compare to other babies his or her age? These can all trigger us to worry about judgment from others and elicit shame-based behaviours and feelings. And so to our threat systems, this is just like we're about to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. It's important to highlight at times it's appropriate for one of the three systems to be more active than others. But actually, in essence, we're aiming to achieve that balance between the three. And so how does compassion play into this? How is that important in achieving that balance? If you were taking the baby for a walk in the pram and a bus came hurtling towards you, in that moment, your soothe system isn't going to help you out. What you really need are the quick reflexes that your threat system generates, so you can move out the way quickly or freeze and hope that it sees you in time. But if we're only ever paying attention to sources of threat in that way, then our threat system is constantly being activated, and we can find ourselves stuck in that, looping around all the different problems and difficulties we have. And so compassion enables us to balance out the threat system. It puts a brake on it, and it helps us to think clearly and make more effective decisions. And this is known to have an impact on both our mental and physical health. Things like immunity, cardiovascular disease have all been associated with the compassionate mind. So this really invites us to think about how we can use the compassionate mind to balance out those systems and temper that threat system in particular. So the first strategy I want to talk about is breathing. Now, I appreciate how the idea of breathing can feel like it's not enough, and how we've often all had those invalidating and experiences of people perhaps telling us to calm down and take a breath. But actually, this is one of my favourite skills for its simplicity, accessibility, and its effectiveness. So typically, when we're in our threat system, our breathing becomes more rapid and shallow. And in order to activate our soothe system and increase our potential for compassion, we need to go ahead and take deeper and slower breaths. And you can find lots of breathing apps and advice on the internet about paced breathing. But essentially, the key here is to slow your breath down and to breathe as deeply as you can, fill up your lungs as much as you can, and expand your diaphragm. And to exhale by emptying your breath emptying your lungs as fully as possible. And just finding a regular rhythm that feels right for you, and then sticking with that. And a way of enhancing the breath and the impact of it is to change your body posture. So our threat system and evolution has it that we hunch our shoulders when our threat system is activated. And so by using our body posture, we can have an impact on our threat system. So you do that by sitting or standing upright with your shoulders back, and gently just see if you can, when you stand up, notice the curve of your spine is curved inwards. And I'd also recommend that you place your hands on your lap with your palms facing upwards, indicating that open and willing and grounded stance. And to enhance this further, see if you can do anything to soften your facial expression. So move from perhaps a more neutral face to one that's more friendly and warm and welcoming. So it doesn't have to be a big grin, but just a softening of your face, and experiment with this and see what that feels like. Because we know that the emotion center of the brain, the amygdala, is highly sensitive to the nuances in our faces and our facial expressions. So this can have a real direct impact on your autonomic nervous system. The second skill I'd like to talk about is imagery. So research shows that imagery can be very powerful at triggering emotions. And our brains are not very good at distinguishing between an image and reality. So we'll often process and respond to an image as if it was actually occurring for real. So an example of this might be thinking of food that you really love. And for me, that's pizza. For you, it might be chocolate or drink, wine maybe, whatever it might be. And now close your eyes. And imagine that you have that food or drink in front of you. And imagine getting up close to it. Perhaps smelling it. And just see if you can notice what's happening as you do that. See if you can pick out any physical sensations you might be having. Okay, and just come back again now. And think many people notice that they have a physical reaction when they imagine their desired food. They might even notice that their mouth is salivating. And this is because the brain is processing that image as if the food was really in front of us. And so actually strategically, we can use imagery to build a compassionate mind. So with that, I'd like to invite you in this moment, if you're willing, to ground yourself again with your breath and close your eyes. And think about 3 qualities that you think you would have if you were being your most compassionate self. The 3 characteristics that you would embody if you were your compassionate best. And if you're noticing other thoughts entering your mind that might be taking you away from this exercise, things like, what's the point? I'll never be able to do it. I don't deserve this. This is weird. I can't stop thinking about the food, what I'm going to have for dinner tonight. Whatever it may be, as best you can, approach those thoughts with a gentle acceptance and kindness, and reorientate yourself back to thinking about the attributes that you would have if you were able to be your most compassionate self. At this point, it's simply about fantasizing what those qualities would be and how you would approach yourself and others. It might not feel real right now, and that's okay. Okay, so if you open your eyes again now, our aim is to develop an image that triggers a compassionate attitude or mindset, prompting us to feel and think and act in compassionate ways. And to really try and practice these as regularly as possible, because we know how powerful that threat system is and how quickly it can override our soothe system. Paul Gilbert talks about a 2-minute under the duvet exercise. And that's where 2 minutes before you get out of bed, just try and connect with your compassionate image and its qualities and what that looks like and how you would behave. That's really quite a nice little idea. And here's just a little caption which resonated with the idea of intention and practice. We used to think that the brain could only learn and adapt until we were in our early 20s. But modern science tells us that our brains are changing all the time, and the axons and dendrites of the brain cells that are being exercised and grow will develop. And that's called neuroplasticity. And therefore, when we're learning a new skill or set of competencies, like those involved in compassion, the more we practice it, the better we'll be at it. The perinatal period can often be a time when we reflect on our own childhood and think about the parts of our own parenting we would like to adopt for ourselves or things that we would rather avoid. It can be a time of joy and excitement, but as mentioned previously, it can also be a time of huge stress, change and turmoil as we adapt to these different roles and different responsibilities. And as highlighted earlier, this can be a time that our self-criticism and negative comparisons with others also really ramp up, meaning that our threat system is repeatedly being activated. Of course, from its perspective, it's doing its job to alert us. Babies are vulnerable and they need a lot of nurturing care. But if you can find ways to be compassionate to the parts of yourself that you don't love, you wish you didn't have, that you don't like, that's when we're really in business. So rather than avoiding thinking about those painful emotions or hiding away from others because perhaps we feel too ashamed, A compassionate approach would be to recognize those self-critical thoughts as part of our makeup that we didn't choose to have, and recognize that it's our threat system that is trying to do its best to protect us. It's a bit like a misunderstood hero or heroine. It may appear mean and evil, but really it's just trying to do its best. And perceiving our threat system in this way can allow us to courageously step back from those thoughts and instead relate to those messages in a non-blaming and accepting way. And if you wanted to hear more about how we can open up and accept our negative thoughts, you might like to watch my webinar called Living a Meaningful Life with COVID-19. There's also a link to a short video at the end of this slide, which you might like to find helpful to watch. Another way of engaging the soothing system is called social connectedness, and I'll say more about why in a second. But of course, at the moment, we're advised to social distance. Paul Gilbert prefers to use the term safe relating, and I really like that too, because the emphasis really here is on relating, but in a safe way, rather than actually distancing socially. Now, as hunter-gatherers, we lived in a communal society where surviving meant sticking together. Our brains were wired for connection, and if a person in the hunter-gatherer group were to be ostracized, that probably meant certain death. And our brains are still programmed like that today. So if we're rejected, it's like the brain is screaming that this will be the end of us, that we're going to die. And we've also evolved to take care of our babies in groups so that we didn't have to wait until our offspring were independent of us to have more children, and thus could have children closer age together, and that fulfills our innate need to reproduce. And we also thrive in groups and trusting relationships where we experience comfort and kindness from others, particularly during stressful periods. And it's especially important to our well-being. So given how fundamental social connectedness is for us, particularly during a crisis like this, it's really important to find ways of connecting with others that we love and trust. And our challenge now is to see if we can find ways of using technology and other creative ways to be and connect with others without putting ourselves at risk or other people. So perhaps asking grandparents to set time during the evening to read a book or sing some nursery rhymes to your baby or even your bump. Joining virtual mother and baby support groups. Perhaps choosing to video call instead of text. Or maybe be on the phone with someone whilst you watch a movie together or go for a walk together, really making the most of that one opportunity to be outside. Because even relating virtually can put a brake on the threat system. Yet another way to foster a more compassionate mind is thinking about our strengths. Now, just jumping in straight away, this is not about ignoring all the things that perhaps we're not doing as well as we'd want to be, or just thinking positively all the time. But it's about developing a more rich and full perspective of our world. So if I can invite you now to participate in a quick exercise, if you could just take your hands and place them over your face like this. And just look around the room and notice what it's like to view your surroundings in this way. Notice what's your vision like and how easy or difficult it is to see your environment. And now bring your hands down so they're about 90 degrees in front of you. And now look around your room and notice what that's like. So you'll probably be able to see that your hands are still there. They've not gone. Hands are still there and you can still see them in your field of vision. But that actually you can view your environment in a more clear way. And so if our hands perhaps equated to our problems, and we were viewing our problems in this very close and fused way, and just attending to those, just as our threat system designs us to do, then we're likely to be missing out on noticing the things in our lives that we're doing okay at, the things we're proud of, the things that we're appreciative of or feel grateful for at the moment. They may not be huge, and that's okay. Something that gives you a sense of accomplishment or mastery. And just be careful if when you're doing this, you're noticing those devaluing and belittling critical thoughts creeping in. And see if you can accept those, understanding their presence without becoming glued to them and without allowing them to distract you from noticing those strengths. Another way to encourage the soothe system to be activated is about doing things, behaviors, actively doing behaviors that are going to bring along feelings of calm and still and safety. Now, often these things actually feel quite nice, but this really isn't just about things feeling good. This is about activating a system that can help you think more clearly and actually be more effective. And it's about balancing those three emotion systems. Here are some ideas of self-soothing that others have found helpful, and they're structured according to your 5 senses. And this is quite a good way of doing it. Just see if you can pick one thing for each sense that gives you an experience of slowing down and calming. It's going to be different for all of you. Everyone's going to be quite unique with this. See if you can have a go at just letting yourself enjoy a moment of stillness and safety, and let go of those distracting thoughts that may come in that tell you not to do this, to do something else instead. So as well as being compassionate to ourselves, we also like to think about compassionate behaviours we can offer others. And here's a list of different things that you might like to try. Of course, at the moment, our social distancing and safe relating actually is a way of being compassionate to others and protecting others and those most vulnerable in particular. And as a species, we are motivated by helping others. It makes us feel good. It brings us a sense of comfort. But just to also highlight here that taking care of others isn't the same as being passive or unassertive or submissive to other people's demands. It isn't just doing what other people tell you to. But taking care of others is motivated from a sense of kindness within us that we want to show others in some way through kind behaviours. And just to finish here now then, here are some of the common challenges that people experience when faced with increasing their compassionate minds. So the first is your early life experiences. And it's proposed that for some people, experiencing limited care, kindness and nurturing from others whilst they grow up can also in some ways leave that soothe system underdeveloped, because it thrives on being stimulated by compassion and compassionate experiences from others. But remember what I said earlier about neuroplasticity. That doesn't mean that nothing can change. Granted, it will be harder, but importantly, it can change. And it happens through practice. Of course, a baby is likely to get in the way of particularly some of those more relaxing, soothing behaviours, but also the way we prioritise them when we're juggling so many other difficult demands. See if you can have a go at thinking about how to interweave compassionate behaviour and thinking into your daily activities. If taking a hot bath is part of what you do to relax, is there a way of having your baby in there with you? Perhaps prioritising having a nice hot coffee before you get on with your chores when the baby's sleeping, instead of doing it the other way round. Maybe you might choose to practice your breathing whilst you're giving your baby a bottle or feeding her. What about maybe next time noticing when your baby does something cute or develops in some way, that this prompts you to notice something that you've done that you're proud of, you're appreciative of. Negative beliefs about compassion can also get in the way of us being compassionate. Some of us kind of cringe at the idea of being self-compassionate. It just feels wrong in some ways, almost aversive. It makes us kind of square in our chairs. And it can have those kind of very negative connotations, perhaps inaccurately known as being too touchy-feely or woolly and washy. Or perhaps if I'm kind to myself and compassionate, I might end up being too lazy or self-indulgent, self-pity. But I hope today's presentations has really challenged some of those ideas, and that you can begin to view compassion instead as a courageous and wise way of relating to yourself, particularly when things are difficult for you, and how it's a basis for effectiveness is rooted in scientific evidence. It's not woolly and washy. And finally, when we're cut off or perhaps in autopilot, we might find it really hard to be aware that we're even struggling. We just keep going and going and going. We might not catch those unhelpful critical thoughts that we are having and the way we treat ourselves. And we can then really find that we get tangled up and stuck in our struggle, never really pausing to consciously recognize that we are struggling, and that maybe we could deal with it in a different way. So that brings me to the end of my talk today. I'd like to say thank you for listening. It really has been a pleasure putting these slides together and sharing these ideas with you. And if you have any questions at all about compassion and how to develop your compassionate mind, please feel free to email me on that email address. Thank you everyone again. Take care and be safe.